A quick new idea, daily, from the world's greatest TEDx talks. I'm your host, Atossa Leoni, and this is TEDx Shorts. Whether it's an apartment rental, home ownership, or transitional housing, it's empowering to make a home yours. Even in spaces like refugee camps, where residents have fled dangerous or oppressive conditions to be given shelter for an indefinite amount of time. But if circumstances force them to stay there indefinitely, there has to be a way to make their environment more livable. Hi, William Chan is an architect who's looked at the ways some refugee residents in Greece improve their spaces through ingenuity and the reuse of existing resources. In today's episode, he looks at how resources in these camps can be improved to inspire and empower the residents living in them.
Welcome to the Skaramangas refugee camp in Greece. Along the fence line, a young teenager from Afghanistan picks up a plastic bottle off the ground. Her name is Sana, and she's 13 years old. As this plastic bottle is picked up, she exclaims, "Mufid, Mufid, this is Mufid." Mufid in Arabic means useful. Sana and her friends from Afghanistan and Syria were collecting waste, something that is no longer useful, and yet they were saying the exact opposite. They were treating the discarded plastic as though they were picking up $10 off the ground, as though the plastic waste material could somehow be useful to their homes, the refugee shelters that they lived in. Sana and her friends arrived in Greece with their parents by boat, wearing life jackets as they made the treacherous journey across the Mediterranean Sea. The refugee camp has now become their home. It has become their city. Even with limited resources, the girls need to continue with their lives in this new environment. But here's a question. If this refugee camp became your new home, how would you create a better environment for yourself? Not just for survival, but an environment to actually live in. 68.5 million people are forcibly displaced. Out of the entire refugee population, over half are under the age of 18. They are children, teenagers, young people. Forced migration has created an unprecedented humanitarian crisis because the journeys are dangerous and the refugee camps that await them, should they make it to that point, are barely livable. But to assume that these camps are impermanent is equally dangerous. It is what has caused inhumane living conditions from overcrowding and mismanagement of these sites. Some of the refugee youth I met in the camps in Greece had been living there for 2 to 3 years, others for over 5 years. In refugee camps in other places in the world, entire generations grow up in a camp environment. What I've come to realize is that these aren't the transient sites we thought. Our world sees refugee camps as temporary, short-term emergency responses. But for young people who have been forced to leave their homes and their friends, living in a refugee camp is a long-term reality. Just like cities, refugee camps are places where people call home. And so when we look at solutions, we need to understand these structures and environments as their homes, and not as tents that will be packed up and moved on. Instead of young people putting their lives on hold, suspending their dreams, and waiting indefinitely, they need to live their lives. For young refugees like Sana, they don't just need resources and technology. What about empowerment and creativity? Rather than being only recipients of charity and aid, they can be empowered to create, to be the creators of their future. My previous experiences working with vulnerable communities such as slum dwellers and homeless people, has taught me that we must work with existing solutions and the existing community in order to find out what they need. So in Greece, we looked at what already existed in the community. And we found out that local Greek architects had set up these amazing fabrication labs and makerspaces, classrooms that had been filled with 3D printers, laser cutters, and computers so that refugees could physically create and design. I was very surprised and inspired to see a refugee shelter completely transformed into one of these fab labs. But do you know what else was already there? What else already existed in these refugee camps? Vast amounts of plastic waste. Humanitarian aid products would be covered in plastic. And despite the provision of recycling bins within these camps, garbage trucks would blindly mix all of the waste together. And yet, all of this plastic waste could be used in the 3D printers to create something new. It could be useful. It could be mufid. So we collaborated with Sana and her friends to make this a reality. They cut the plastic bottles into tiny pieces using a paper shredder. These pieces would then be placed into a machine that melts the plastic into long strings of 3D printing material, just like spaghetti. These strings of 3D printing material would then be fed into the 3D printer. They can then design and print meaningful objects to improve their own living environments. In other 3D printing programs, young refugees have already printed the connection joints for the steel poles that hold up their shelters. The potential of what can be designed and 3D printed becomes limitless. It is only really limited by their own imaginations. 3D printing becomes the tool for empowerment because refugees have the freedom to create whatever they want. And the best part about the plastic waste material is that they can continue improving their environment while using what already exists in their environment. In creating the future of sustainable urban environments, refugee camps should not be neglected from the design process. Young people can transform what was once junk into something more than economic value. They are gaining skills in critical thinking, problem solving, and creativity. These transferable skills have the most value and are the most useful of them all. Since leaving their hometowns, Sana and other young refugees have not had a lot of control over their lives. You see, they didn't choose for the country to be in conflict. They didn't choose to be a refugee. And they certainly didn't choose to live in a refugee camp. But at least now, they can choose how they create a better environment and a better life for themselves. It is a real shame for these bright young people to put their lives on hold. It is a waste of their potential because they have so much to contribute and offer in our world. But as we have seen, waste can be transformed. When Sana picks up that plastic bottle, she isn't a refugee collecting waste. She is an architect, an engineer, designing her own future. She is an entrepreneur with the tenacity and the capacity to innovate new solutions. She transforms the plastic waste into something useful. And at the same time, she is transforming her own life. All this potential is not wasted. All this potential is useful. It is mufid.
The TEDx talk you just listened to was recorded at a TEDx event in Sydney, Australia. All TEDx events are independently organized by volunteers who believe in TED's mission of ideas worth spreading. Special thanks to the organizing team at TEDxYouth Sydney. Want to listen to more TEDx talks? Visit our website at ted.com/TEDxShorts. I'm Atossa Leoni. Thanks for listening, and see you tomorrow.